Brother Bromley Armstrong was a giant of trade union activist, community activist.
He was my friend. He was like an uncle. He was a mentor.
My dad came from Kingston, Jamaica, the birthplace of Bromley Armstrong. Bromley's work in the late 50s and 60s to change the racist Canadian immigration laws continued to connect to my life.
At a time when to talk about systemic racism was unheard of. They were actually dismantling systemic racism, dealing with institutions, with powerful organizations that were practicing discrimination and challenging those directly.
The different acts of everyday resistance, the sit-in test, be it in Dresden, be it in a housing accommodation in Toronto, those are smart, creative and strategic moves that expose the absurdity and ugliness of racism and exclusion.
What Bromley and others did, it wasn't for them as individuals. It was to make life better for communities, for families, for society, and for Canada as a whole.
Bromley's journey with the Joint Labour Committee on Human Rights, with those who came afterwards, Black Action Defence Committee, Black Lives Matter, so many others, is an important continuum in this long, long journey for a better world.
Who would have thought a young Black woman would end up being the Executive Vice President and the Secretary Treasurer of the Canadian Labour Congress? That we'd have a young Black woman who is President of the Toronto and York Labour Council. I can name them and not stop naming them, and that's because of the work that Bromley did. Inclusion and equity were so important to him, and he not only did the hard work to make sure that we had that, but he made sure that he taught the next generation what they needed to do.
Activism, movement building for social justice, equality and anti-racism, it's an ongoing process, and every generations of activists have to take up their own fight.
That's what I do. That's what I did at the ILO with Convention 190 to eradicate violence and harassment in the world of work.
Is for me, being the current president of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, of which Bromley Armstrong was the founder in 1975.
It's hard to look at where we are and not be a little sad because of all the work that he did in the 1950s and 60s to try and get us to a place where equity and inclusion would be the norm. And we're now in 2022 and it still isn't the norm.
The challenges in front of Canadians in these next few years will be significant.
We see now what's happened across Canada with the fires and the floods. COVID ravaged many of our communities, and we know that it's young Black, Brown, and Indigenous folk that are the worst and first affected by these.
The work that we're doing with pay equity and employment equity. 2022, we should have had that a long time ago.
In our education system, we have to root out systemic racism.
And that includes eradicating discrimination, racism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, ableism.
We have to continue to fight against what we see as the rising tide of white supremacism, Nazism.
We need to challenge the white supremacy within the movement and within the
I
society.
think what we need to remember is that we're bigger than them, and when we work together, there is absolutely nothing that we can't do.
We need all the white brothers and sisters, not just being allies, but co-conspirators. We need to shake the trees.
I want to give a special welcome to all those who have been nominated for the Bromley Armstrong Award. It's a real privilege. You know, I think back to the people who've received this award over these years. They are amazing leaders.
They have not stood by when wrong was happening. They have spoken out.
Some hold high elected office in our movement. Others have been doing the quiet work.
The invisible work in building a stronger, inclusive, and progressive labor movement.
I know Bromley would be very, very proud of all of you and welcome
Thank you for your time, your leadership, and your commitment to building a strong, working class, multiracial labor movement and just society.
This is our moment, our movement.
A moment to make changes in the movement, changes that will matter, changes that will make sure that no one is ever left behind.
Continue Bromley Armstrong's legacy and maximize our practice of everyday resistance.
Let's get to moving and make what we need to happen, happen. And that only happens when we work in solidarity together.
Our moment, our movement.
Our moment, our movement.